At 79, Barry Gibb finally spoke a truth he had carried quietly for decades, a truth about Roy Orbison, a singer whose voice Barry would later call like pulling something out of the heavens. The moment of confession was not tabloid spectacle, it was the slow unfastening of something personal, a public admission of a private debt. That debt was not money or fame, but a map, the tonal and emotional map that guided Barry's own voice and the music he wrote for millions. Barry Allen Crompton Gibb was born on September 1, 1946, in Douglas on the Isle of Man. He was the second of 5 children of Hugh and Barbara Gibb, a family framed by modest means but rich in song. From the earliest memories, music was less a hobby and more an inevitability for Barry, a language he stumbled into as naturally as walking. Where other boys learned trades or sports, Barry learned harmonies, the exact bends and feathered falsettos that would later define entire decades of popular music. The Gibb brothers' path led them across oceans. In the late 1950s, the family relocated to Redcliffe, Queensland, Australia. It was there, in small halls and local stages, that the brothers sharpened the uncanny precision of their harmonies. Observers then might have called it raw talent. Those who watched closely recognized something rarer, a shared intuition, a way 3 voices folded into one feeling. Barry, always the creative anchor, began to emerge not simply as a singer but as the songwriter and architect of their sound. His voice, capable of a fragile falsetto and a warm low register, was already hinting at the emotional reach he would claim years later. This beginning matters because it frames the rest. The Bee Gees were more than national success, they were a craft refined under pressure, a family instrument tuned by hardship and devotion. Yet even as success loomed, Barry carried with him the private influence of other artists, elders whose phrasing, restraint, or raw confessional power would teach him how to turn personal fracture into public song. Roy Orbison was one such elder. Orbison didn't teach Barry by direct mentorship in the studio so much as by example, the way he could make loneliness feel like sacred ground, the way a single held note could carry the weight of an entire life. Barry's confession about Orbison, then, is less celebrity name-dropping and more the revelation of a compass he had followed for years without naming. By the mid-1960s, the world of music was shifting at lightning speed. The British invasion was rewriting the rules, and every young band dreamed of finding its sound before the noise swallowed them whole. For the Gibb brothers, that moment came not through imitation, but through instinct. Barry, Robin, and Maurice returned from Australia to England with a suitcase of handwritten songs, a few demo tapes, and a hunger that burned brighter than anything fame could offer. What began as a family act singing at fairs and radio stations was about to become a phenomenon that would stretch across generations. Their early singles, Spicks and Specks, New York Mining Disaster 1941, and To Love Somebody, weren't just chart entries, they were declarations. Each song carried a signature blend of melody and melancholy, hope and heartbreak. Barry's falsetto voice, sharp as glass yet trembling with vulnerability, became the emotional anchor that pulled listeners closer. Audiences could hear what critics later called the ache of truth in every phrase he sang. The Bee Gees' rise wasn't simply a product of catchy rhythms or clever production. It was the sound of a family trying to make sense of life through music. When Barry wrote, he wrote as a brother, as a son, as a man chasing meaning. That emotional authenticity became their superpower, a mirror for listeners who felt their own longing in songs like Massachusetts and I Started a Joke. And then came the storm, the 1970s. The Bee Gees didn't just adapt to disco, they defined it. With the release of Saturday Night Fever in 1977, their music ignited a cultural revolution. The soundtrack became one of the best-selling albums of all time, transforming Barry into both an icon and a symbol of an entire era. But fame, for Barry, was never a destination. As stadiums filled and awards piled up, he still felt drawn to the quieter voices that had once guided him. Late at night, away from the roar of fans, he would return to Roy Orbison's songs, the trembling honesty of crying, the ghostly beauty of In Dreams. Orbison's music reminded him that greatness wasn't about spectacle, it was about sincerity. Even as Barry stood under blinding lights, another voice echoed quietly in his mind, a voice that reminded him why he sang in the first place. It wasn't for fame, nor for survival. It was for truth. And that truth, he would one day confess, was something Roy Orbison had taught him long before the world called him a legend. Long before fame turned Barry Gibb into a global icon, he had already found his North Star, a man whose voice seemed to come from some place between heaven and heartbreak. That man was Roy Orbison. To the young Barry, Orbison wasn't just another name on the radio, he was a revelation. There was something in that trembling vibrato, in the way Roy could pour raw emotion into a single syllable, that spoke to Barry's soul in ways no words ever could. Songs like Only the Lonely and Crying didn't just play, they ached. They reached inside the listener and held up a mirror to every hidden sorrow. Barry would later say that Orbison taught him something most singers never learn, that power in music doesn't come from volume or perfection, but from vulnerability. Roy could sing sadness as if it were sacred, Barry once reflected. He showed me that pain could be beautiful, if you were brave enough to share it. Years later, when Barry finally met Roy Orbison in person, it felt less like meeting an idol and more like standing before a kindred spirit. Roy was nothing like the superstar image painted by magazines, he was quiet, polite, almost shy. Behind his trademark sunglasses was a man who had suffered deeply, and who had learned to turn that suffering into song. Their meeting was brief, but it left a mark. Orbison treated Barry not as a rival, but as a peer, one who understood the burden of feeling too much. They talked about melody, about truth in lyrics, about the strange loneliness that comes with fame. For Barry, those words sank deep. He realized that being a great artist wasn't about chasing adoration, it was about being honest enough to hurt in public. After that encounter, Barry carried Orbison's lessons like scripture. Every falsetto he sang, every lyric about love and loss, carried traces of Roy's emotional blueprint. Even the Bee Gees' most upbeat songs, if you listen closely, were built on the same foundation, joy trembling on the edge of sorrow. Orbison became, in Barry's own words, the man who taught me to feel. Their paths would only cross a handful of times, but the echo of that connection would resonate through Barry's career for the rest of his life. Behind the glittering legacy of the Bee Gees, the sold-out arenas, the diamond-selling albums, the standing ovations, lay a silence that few could imagine. Fame had given Barry Gibb everything the world could offer, and yet it had quietly taken almost everything that mattered most. In 2003, the first crack appeared in that shining world. Maurice Gibb, Barry's younger brother, his steady compass, the calm to his storm, passed away unexpectedly. It was sudden, cruel, and utterly disorienting. For Barry, losing Maurice wasn't just losing a bandmate, it was like watching a piece of his soul vanish. He was the balance, Barry would later say, the one who kept the music and me grounded. The grief was unbearable, but Barry tried to keep moving. He turned back to the stage, to the only sanctuary he knew, music. Yet every time he stood under the lights, the harmonies that once soared now sounded incomplete. The echoes of Maurice's voice haunted every chord, every lyric. Then, in 2012, tragedy came again. Robin, Barry's twin in spirit, his mirror in melody, lost his battle with cancer. The world mourned the passing of another legend, but for Barry, it was something far more intimate. He was now the last surviving Bee Gee. The boy who had once shared microphones, secrets, and laughter with his brothers now stood utterly alone. Barry described that time as a fog I didn't think I could walk out of. The joy of performing became a reminder of what he had lost. The music that once connected him to the world now tethered him to grief. There were moments he considered walking away from it all. What was the point of singing if the people you sang with were gone? And yet, something kept him going. Something that whispered softly through the pain, a voice that reminded him that music was not just about life, but also about survival. That voice, once again, was Roy Orbison's. When Barry listened to Crying or It's Over, he heard more than melodies, he heard resilience. Orbison had known grief too. He had buried a wife, lost children, and still found the strength to sing about love. It was that courage that Barry clung to. So he kept singing. For Robin. For Maurice. For the love of what they had built together. On stage, when the lights dimmed and his falsetto floated into the dark, it carried more than notes, it carried ghosts, memories, and promises. The audience heard music. But Barry knew what it truly was, a prayer, whispered through pain, to the brotherhood that had shaped his life. As Barry Gibb grew older, the noise of fame began to fade, replaced by reflection, by long hours alone, by quiet moments replaying memories like old records. The applause that had once been thunderous was now distant. In its place came a softer sound, the truth finally asking to be spoken. When Barry finally opened up about Roy Orbison, it wasn't during a grand interview or some public celebration. It came in passing, gentle, almost reluctant, as if the truth had been sitting in his chest for years, waiting for permission to breathe. He confessed that Roy Orbison had shaped him more profoundly than anyone outside his own family. Roy had a way of singing that tore you apart, Barry said. He could turn heartbreak into something holy. Barry explained that Orbison's songs, Crying, In Dreams, Running Scared, were like emotional blueprints. They taught him that real strength didn't come from hiding pain, but from showing it. Every time Roy sang about loneliness, he wasn't performing, he was revealing. And in those revelations, Barry found himself. He admitted that his signature falsetto, the very sound that made the Bee Gees immortal, was born from that lesson. Roy gave me permission to be fragile, he said. He made it okay for men to sound vulnerable. It wasn't imitation, it was evolution. Barry had taken what Orbison embodied: honesty, vulnerability, emotional courage, and built upon it, crafting a sound that would touch the world. As he spoke about Orbison, there was no jealousy, no competition, only gratitude. He's the reason I could write about love the way I did, Barry said softly. He taught me that pain could sing. That confession wasn't just about influence. It was an acknowledgement that even legends have heroes, that no matter how far you rise, there's always someone who lit the first spark. For Barry, that spark was Roy Orbison. And through his words, you could feel not just admiration, but something deeper, the kind of love that exists only between two souls who understand the weight of their art. Legacies are never written in isolation. They are mosaics, built from influences, mentors, triumphs, and heartbreaks. And when we look at the stories of Barry Gibb and Roy Orbison, what emerges is a bridge between eras, between styles, and between two men bound by the raw truth of music. Roy Orbison, often called the Caruso of rock, left behind more than just songs. His voice carried a tenderness rarely seen in male performers of his time. He gave permission to generations of artists to be vulnerable, to sing of loneliness without shame, to stand on a stage with trembling honesty. His haunting ballads became eternal companions for anyone who had ever loved and lost. Barry Gibb, in turn, carried that torch into a new dimension. The Bee Gees may have become synonymous with disco, but at the heart of their music was always something deeper: emotion, confession, humanity. Behind the pulsating beats of Stayin' Alive or the tender refrain of How Deep Is Your Love, there was an echo, Orbison's echo, reminding Barry that music was first and foremost about the truth. What makes their connection immortal is not just the influence of one on the other, but how it transcended time. Orbison belonged to the early age of rock and roll, a time of heartbreak ballads and quiet confessions. Barry belonged to an era of global stages, flashing lights, and cultural revolutions. Yet their songs, though born in different worlds, shared the same soul. Both men believed that music was not meant to hide the cracks in life, but to shine a light through them. And that is their shared legacy: two voices, different yet kindred, teaching the world that pain is not something to be buried, but something to be sung. Orbison planted the seed, and Barry made it bloom into something vast, reaching across continents and decades. Even now, when Barry steps onto a stage and lifts his falsetto into the night, it is not only his brothers he carries with him. It is also Roy Orbison, the ghostly presence in the background, the unseen mentor whose songs still live between Barry's notes. Their connection is not bound by time. It is not diminished by death. It is immortal, because music, their music, refuses to fade. Barry Gibb's confession about Roy Orbison is not merely a tribute, it is a window into what it means to be human beneath the legend. It reminds us that even those who seem larger than life are often shaped by the quiet brilliance of others. At 79, Barry did not speak these words for attention or nostalgia. He spoke them because truth, no matter how long it hides, always finds its way to the surface. For decades, the world had known Barry as the architect of shimmering harmonies and glittering stages. But behind the spotlight stood a man humbled by the voice of another, a man who learned from Roy Orbison that true greatness lies not in perfection, but in sincerity. What Barry revealed was not just admiration, it was gratitude. Gratitude to an artist who helped him understand that pain could be music, that heartbreak could be healing, and that a single voice could echo through eternity. And perhaps that is why their stories still move us. Because deep down, we recognize ourselves in them, in their fragility, their courage, their yearning to turn suffering into something beautiful. The connection between Barry Gibb and Roy Orbison is more than artistic, it is universal. It reminds us that